The desert sun bled across the horizon, painting the wooden facades of the frontier town in molten gold. Dust swirled around the boots of cowhands and merchants crowding toward the square, the buzz of excitement thick in the air. At the center, a platform had been raised, rough planks hammered together in haste, the kind used for public spectacle. Today it was for an auction, one that promised to be more than livestock or stolen rifles. The murmur spoke of captives, of blood spilled in the hills, of the spoils of raids. In this place, freedom was fragile, and survival often meant looking away. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the gathering, a figure cut from both grit and weariness. His frame was lean from years of hard labor, his face lined with scars that told of battles fought long before the West swallowed him whole. The brim of his hat shadowed eyes as sharp as a hawk's, though lately dulled by loss. He had not intended to stop here, not today. His trail had been toward supplies, whiskey perhaps, and then the solitude of his ranch. Yet something had pulled him to the crowd, a restless tug in his gut that whispered he should watch. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip, fast-talking and cruelly cheerful. One by one, the captives were brought forth, men beaten into silence, women staring at the ground as if the dust would swallow them. Coins clinked, laughter rose, and with each sale, Ethan felt his stomach knot tighter. He had seen slavery before, seen men turned into property during the war, but it struck him differently now. The West was supposed to be a land of second chances. Instead, here was the same darkness dressed in new dust. Then she appeared, dragged onto the platform by two guards. The Apache woman stood tall despite the chains at her wrists. Her long black hair spilled down her shoulders, catching the light like a raven's wing. Her eyes, dark and unwavering, scanned the crowd with a pride that seemed unbreakable. The jeers began immediately. "Wild thing," someone shouted. "She'll cut your throat before she warms your bed." Another laugh followed, coarse and mean. But she did not flinch. Even with shackles digging into her skin, she radiated defiance. Ethan felt his throat dry. He told himself to look away, to let the crowd have its spectacle, but his gaze refused to leave her. There was something in her silence, in the way she refused to be broken, that mirrored a part of him he thought long buried. Years ago, raiders had taken everything from him. His wife, his daughter, his peace. He had buried them under a cottonwood tree, promising never to let his heart be touched again. Yet here, in the middle of a noisy street, he felt something stir against his will. The bidding began, half-hearted at first. No man wanted the trouble of taming an Apache. Some offered low sums, more for the sport of it than the prize. The auctioneer's face twisted with frustration as he tried to drive the price higher. Strong as an ox, beautiful as a desert flower, worth her weight in gold. Still the crowd laughed. To them she was a curiosity, a danger, not a prize. Ethan's hand moved before his mind caught up. His voice rang out, firm and certain, cutting through the noise. 200. The square fell silent. Heads turned, eyes narrowing. The auctioneer blinked, surprised, then grinned like a vulture smelling fresh meat. 200. Do I hear more? But no one answered. Murmurs rose instead. Why would Ethan Cole, a man known for caution and solitude, throw away hard-earned coin on a woman who might slit his throat in his sleep? The gavel struck wood, and the deal was done. Chains clinked as the guards pushed her toward him, sneering as they handed over the key. Ethan unlocked the cuffs, his fingers brushing against her wrist. Her skin was warm, her gaze steady, piercing straight through him. For a moment, it felt less like he had freed her and more like she had chosen to stand beside him. The walk back to his ranch was long, carried out in silence. She did not lag behind, nor did she run when he left her unbound. Each step she took was measured, deliberate, as if she were testing him with her presence. When they reached his cabin, small and worn against the vast desert, he lit a lantern and gestured to a chair. "You're free," he said, voice low, uncertain. "If you want to leave, no one will stop you." She did not move. Instead, she stood in the corner, her eyes fixed on him with a calm that felt almost accusatory. Ethan tried again, words clumsy on his tongue. "I don't own you. I won't." Still nothing. Only silence, steady and heavy, filling the space between them. Finally, she lowered herself to the floor, curling near the fireplace, her back straight, her gaze still unyielding. It was as though she were daring him to prove his words true. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the faint crackle of fire. He wondered why he had done it. Why spend so much on a stranger when he could barely keep his own ranch alive? Why risk the judgment of a town eager to see him fail? He turned over and caught sight of her silhouette, still awake, watching the flames. She looked neither broken nor afraid, but something else, unreadable, vast as the desert itself. Sleep came in fits, broken by dreams of his daughter's laughter and the cries that had silenced it. He woke with sweat on his brow, heart pounding. She was still awake, eyes catching the faint glow of embers. For the first time, Ethan felt unsettled not because of her silence, but because of what it stirred in him. By dawn, when the desert sky flared crimson, she was still there. She rose without a word, moved past him, and stepped outside into the sharp morning air. Ethan followed, uncertain, but found her standing tall against the horizon, chains discarded in the dust. The sun caught her face, fierce and untamed, and Ethan felt a truth settle in his chest like an iron weight. He thought he had bought her freedom. Instead, he realized, he had bound himself to something far greater, something he could neither control nor escape. And in that moment, standing on the edge of a new day, he knew his life would never again be his alone. The days that followed were marked by silence, the kind that clung like desert heat, heavy and suffocating. Ethan tried to settle into routine, but every movement in the cabin felt altered by the woman's presence. She did not speak, not at first. Instead, she worked with quiet precision, tending the fire, hauling water, gathering brush without being asked. She carried herself as though the walls around her were not a home but a boundary she had chosen to tolerate. Ethan found himself stealing glances when he thought she wasn't looking, puzzled by her calm resolve. She was neither guest nor prisoner, neither servant nor partner. She simply was. He filled the silence with small attempts at conversation, his voice sounding clumsy in his own ears. He told her of the ranch, of how the soil fought against his plow, of how coyotes kept him awake at night. He even tried a joke once, about how the outhouse door squealed louder than a drunk in a saloon. She gave him nothing, no smile, no sound, only that steady gaze that seemed to weigh and measure him. For a man used to commanding respect with a glance or a draw of his pistol, it unsettled him more than a gang of outlaws ever had. One evening after supper, he set his fork down and leaned forward, his patience thinning. "You've got a name," he said, almost a challenge. "I won't keep calling you girl." For the first time since she had entered his home, her lips parted. A single word, spoken with the weight of a stone dropped into still water, filled the space between them. "Ayanna." Ethan repeated it under his breath, rolling it over his tongue. "Eternal blossom." The sound of it lodged in his chest, a reminder that behind the silence was someone whole, someone whose story stretched far beyond his comprehension. Over the next days, fragments of her past slipped through. She spoke little, but in the soft hours before dawn, when the desert air was cool and forgiving, she revealed pieces of her history like shards of broken pottery. A family wiped out by soldiers, a village burned, a brother lost to the same chains she had worn. Her voice never wavered, yet beneath it Ethan heard the echo of grief. He recognized it because it matched his own, the echo of a family he had buried, the memory of laughter replaced by silence. Their wounds were different, but the scar was the same. The town, however, was less forgiving. Whispers spread like wildfire the moment Ethan returned from the auction with her by his side. Men spat in the dirt when he passed. Women tugged their children closer. One afternoon, while he hitched his horse outside the saloon, the sheriff approached. The man's badge gleamed in the sunlight, though his eyes held no shine. "Cole," he drawled, his tone lined with warning. "You know what folks are saying. Keeping her under your roof is trouble waiting to happen. I'd advise you send her back with the traders before that trouble finds you." Ethan stared him down, his jaw tight. "She's no one's property," he said simply, then walked away, though the words left his throat raw with defiance. Trouble came sooner than he expected. A group of ranchers, fueled by whiskey and the courage of numbers, cornered him one evening outside the saloon. Their leader, a broad man with fists like hammers, sneered. "Heard you bought yourself a wild pet, Cole. Thought you were smarter than that." The circle tightened, hands hovering near belts. Ethan's humor, the dry edge that had carried him through war and loss, slipped out before his caution could stop it. "Pet's got more backbone than any of you. Careful, she might bite if you get too close." Laughter erupted, though it was sharp and mean. The leader lunged, and in an instant Ethan's revolver was in his hand, gleaming under the gaslight. He didn't fire, just held it steady, his finger loose but ready. Silence fell, broken only by the shuffle of boots retreating. The men backed off, grumbling, but their eyes promised the matter was far from over. When Ethan returned home that night, blood still thrumming in his veins, Ayanna was waiting by the fire. She said nothing, but the flicker of her gaze told him she knew. He sat heavily, rubbed his temples and muttered, "Town thinks I've lost my mind." For the first time, her expression softened. She lifted her chin and spoke, her voice low but certain. "You fight because you are afraid." The words stung more than he expected. He wanted to argue, to tell her fear had never ruled him, but deep down he knew she had struck truth. He was afraid, not of men, not of death, but of what he felt when he looked at her. The silence between them began to shift after that. Not gone, but changed, as though her words had cracked something open. One morning, he saddled his horse and gestured for her to join him. She hesitated only a moment before climbing up behind him. He rode out past the fences, where the land stretched wide and unforgiving. There he showed her the trails, the water holes, the mesquite groves where deer sometimes gathered. She listened, eyes bright, then slipped from the saddle and placed her hand on the earth. She murmured in Apache, teaching him the word for river, for sky, for fire. He repeated them clumsily, earning the faintest curve of her lips, almost a smile, fleeting as wind through grass. They grew accustomed to the rhythm of shared space. He learned she favored the mornings, moving with a quiet efficiency that shamed his own sluggish habits. She learned his tendency to hum old war tunes when mending fences, a habit he hadn't noticed until her laughter, soft and sudden, startled him into silence. The walls of the cabin no longer pressed with suffocating quiet. Instead, they held the fragile threads of something beginning to take shape. Yet peace in the West was always temporary. One evening, returning from the barn, Ethan found a note nailed to his cabin door, written in a crude scrawl, "Return the Apache, or bleed like one." His hand tightened around the paper until it tore. He carried it inside, tossed it into the fire, and met Ayanna's gaze. She had seen it, of course, her eyes missed nothing. For the first time she spoke his name, not as an echo but as a warning. "They will not stop." Ethan sat down heavily, the weight of her words pressing on his shoulders. He had known the whispers would turn into action, but hearing it spoken aloud anchored the truth. She was right. Trouble was circling, and it wasn't just his fight anymore. He looked at her across the flames, her face sharp with resolve, and felt the ground shift beneath him. Whatever storm was coming, it would not break them apart. It would bind them closer, whether he was ready or not. The warning came in the dead of night. Ayanna's sharp intake of breath pulled Ethan from uneasy sleep, and before his hand found the pistol at his bedside, the scent of smoke had already reached him. Flames licked the barn outside, bright against the black sky, and the crackle of burning timber was drowned by the thunder of hooves. Shadows darted across the yard, rifles flashing as masked riders hooped and hollered, their voices a hateful chorus. Ethan shoved the door open, the blast of heat stinging his face, and raised his revolver. The first shot split the night like a whip, and a man tumbled from his saddle. Everything blurred into motion. Horses screamed, wood splintered, bullets tore into walls. Ethan fired again and again. His breath sharp, movements quick. Each second carried on pure instinct. Ayanna snatched the rifle from the mantel and dropped to her knees by the window. Her figure steady despite the chaos. Her first shot rang true, striking a rider in the chest and sending him sprawling. She moved with no hesitation, as though every breath of her life had prepared her for this moment. Ethan risked a glance at her. Chains once bound her wrists, but here she fought beside him, fierce and unyielding. The barn collapsed with a roar, sparks showering the yard. One attacker leapt from his horse and charged the cabin, a hatchet raised high. Ethan's pistol clicked empty. He braced himself, but before the blow could land, Ayanna swung the rifle but with brutal force, cracking against the man's jaw. He dropped at her feet, groaning. She met Ethan's eyes, chest heaving, and for the first time, he felt no distance between them. The raiders scattered as the fire devoured what they had come to destroy. Some fell beneath Ethan's bullets. Others fled into the darkness, their curses fading with the thunder of retreating hooves. Silence returned only after the last echo died, leaving smoke curling into the star-strewn sky. Ethan leaned against the wall, his arm burning from a grazing shot, while Ayanna's hands shook as she reloaded the rifle. He reached for her shoulder, steadying her, though his own legs trembled with exhaustion. Inside, the cabin glowed dimly with surviving lamplight. Ethan poured water into a basin and hissed as she pressed a cloth to his wound. Her touch was careful but firm, her face unreadable in the flickering glow. He searched for words but found only the truth clawing its way to the surface. "I thought I was buying a woman that day," he said, his voice raw. "But it wasn't her I found. It was me. A piece of me I thought was gone." Her eyes lifted, dark and shining. For the first time, tears gathered but did not fall. "You are not my master," she whispered, each word a vow. "But maybe, you are my home." The silence that followed was heavy with something unspoken yet undeniable, a bond forged not in coin or chains but in fire and blood. The reprieve was brief. At dawn, the sheriff rode in with a posse, their faces hard with expectation. He dismounted, spitting into the dirt before speaking. "You've stirred the hornet's nest, Cole. Men are riled and they'll keep coming. You hand her over, or you won't live to see another sunrise." His tone left no room for compromise. The men behind him shifted, hands twitching toward rifles. Ethan's pulse hammered, but he did not waver. "She stays," he said, each syllable ringing like steel. "She's not theirs to take. She's not mine either. She's free." The sheriff's jaw clenched, but something in Ethan's eyes warned him off pressing further. With a final glare, he mounted up, leaving dust and unspoken threats in his wake. Ayanna stepped from the cabin, her posture straight, her gaze proud. "You chose," she said quietly. Ethan nodded, though the weight of that choice pressed heavier than any bullet wound. The reprieve shattered by sundown. The same ranchers who had cornered him before returned, this time with rifles and numbers enough to embolden them. They waited in the main street, their leader calling Ethan out with a voice thick with malice. "You want to side with savages, Cole? Then you'll die like one." Ethan's grip tightened on his revolver as he stepped into the open. The air was tense, charged like a storm waiting to break. Dust swirled at his boots, the setting sun casting long shadows across the dirt street. Ayanna stood at his side, rifle steady, her presence unshakable. The first shot cracked, and chaos erupted. Men shouted, gunfire split the air, windows shattered. Ethan fired fast, his bullets finding marks, each recoil jolting his injured shoulder. Ayanna's shots rang sharp beside him, dropping one rider after another. They moved as one, back to back, their rhythm unspoken but sure. The street filled with smoke and screams, the scent of gunpowder thick enough to choke. A slug tore into Ethan's shoulder, spinning him off balance. Pain blazed through him, dropping him to one knee. Ayanna cried out, pulling him back with surprising strength, shielding him with her body as she fired again. The attackers faltered, fear creeping into their eyes as their numbers thinned. One by one they fell or fled, until silence reclaimed the street. Ethan slumped against her, blood seeping through his shirt. His breath came ragged, vision swimming. Iona dropped the rifle, her hands pressing to his wound, her voice breaking for the first time. "Do not leave," she begged, the words fierce, desperate. He forced a weak smile, his hand finding hers. "Not leaving," he rasped, though darkness pressed at the edges of his sight. The town, hushed and watching from windows and doorways, had witnessed it all. The man who defied them, the woman who stood beside him, the fight that left bodies cooling in the dirt. Respect, reluctant and bitter, flickered in their eyes. But for Ethan, the only thing that mattered was the warmth of her hands, the steadiness of her gaze, and the fragile thread of breath that still tethered him to the world. The night closed in heavy and uncertain. Iona refused to move from his side, whispering words in her language, prayers that sounded like both comfort and command. Ethan drifted in and out, each breath a battle, each heartbeat a reminder that life hung by the thinnest thread. Yet even through the haze of pain he felt it, the unshakable truth that he was no longer alone. Whatever came next, whether the dawn brought peace or another storm, they would face it together. And that thought carried him into the darkness, clinging to the fragile promise of another sunrise. Dawn came slow, a pale wash of light crawling across the horizon, and with it the heavy stillness after violence. The town street, once echoing with gunfire, now lay quiet except for the groan of boards and the hush of wind through abandoned windows. Ethan woke to the scent of herbs, his body aching as though it had been hammered on an anvil. Iona sat at his side, her hands stained green from crushed leaves, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She had not slept. She pressed a poultice to his wound, steady despite the tremor in her fingers. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence carried not distance but an intimacy born of survival, of shared blood and breath. Ethan tried to rise, but his body betrayed him, collapsing back against the mattress. Frustration burned in his chest, though it was quickly softened by the look in her eyes. There was no pity in them, only resolve. He realized she had carried him through the night not only with her strength but with her refusal to let him slip away. "You should have run," he rasped, his voice cracked from thirst. Iona shook her head, her gaze fierce. "I do not run from what is mine to protect." The words struck deeper than any bullet. She had chosen him, not as master, not as captor, but as something far greater. By midday, the townsfolk gathered at the edge of the ranch, drawn by curiosity, resentment, and a sliver of respect they would not admit aloud. Whispers rippled as Ethan emerged from the cabin, weak but standing, his arm bound in blood-stained cloth. He leaned on Iona's shoulder, though the pride in his stance kept him upright. A hush fell over the crowd. The sheriff was there, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You've made your bed, Cole," he said, voice hard. "But you can't expect this town to accept what you've done." Ethan met his gaze, the weight of his decision steady in his chest. "I don't ask for their acceptance," he answered. "Only their witness." He turned to Iona then, the air thick with expectation. His hand found hers, rough palm against delicate fingers, and for the first time since the war stole his family, he felt whole. "I've buried too much in this land," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered faces. "But today I choose to build." The words hung like a challenge, a vow carved into stone. He looked at her, and the question was clear, though unspoken. Her answer came not in words but in the steady grip of her hand, the slight nod that carried all the weight of a promise. The ceremony was simple. A preacher, reluctant but bound by duty, muttered the rites beneath the open sky. No church bells rang, no fine dresses swirled. Only the desert wind moved through them, carrying the scent of dust and ash. Iona stood tall, adorned with nothing but the pride of her people and the fire in her eyes. Ethan spoke his vows in plain words, raw and unpolished, while she answered with silence that meant more than any sermon. When it was done, the crowd shifted uneasily, torn between outrage and awe. The sheriff tipped his hat, muttering something about the law having no claim here, and turned away. One by one, the others followed, until only the wind remained. Life did not grow easy after that, but it grew different. The ranch bore scars from the attack, blackened timbers and burned earth, yet Iona moved through it with quiet determination, rebuilding what was broken. She wove her traditions into the fabric of the homestead, symbols carved into doorframes, herbs strung to dry above the hearth, songs hummed in the evenings that softened the edges of the day. Ethan, once a man hollowed by loss, found himself laughing again, though the sound startled him each time it rose unbidden. He showed her how to mend saddles, how to guide cattle across rough terrain, and in return she showed him how to listen, to the land, to the silence, to the beating of his own heart. At night, under a sky vast and indifferent, they shared stories by firelight. He told her of his daughter's smile, of the lullabies his wife once sang. She spoke of her brother, of hunts in the high mountains, of stars that guided her people long before the town was built. Their griefs lay side by side, not erased but carried together, lighter for being shared. And as days folded into weeks, Ethan felt the bitter edge of his sorrow soften, replaced by something fierce and tender he had not believed himself capable of again. The town remained wary, its respect begrudging, but no one dared test them further. The men who had ridden against Ethan lay in the ground, and those who watched from windows remembered the sight of him and Iona standing back to back in the smoke. Fear, perhaps more than admiration, kept them silent. Yet whispers changed over time. Where once they spoke of scandal, now they spoke of resolve, of a man who would not bow and a woman who could not be broken. Seasons turned. Grass pushed through the charred remains of the barn, cattle lowed in rebuilt pens, and children from town began to wander near, curious about the strange household where laughter sometimes rose louder than argument. Ethan would watch Iona teach them words in her tongue, patient and firm, her eyes soft in ways they never were with men. He knew then that she had given him more than companionship. She had given him a future. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the desert in fire, Ethan sat with Iona on the porch, his hand resting over hers. The silence stretched, comfortable and whole. He looked out across the land, scarred but alive, and felt the weight of all he had lost, all he had gained. "Never thought I'd find peace here," he said quietly. She turned to him, her gaze steady, and answered, "Peace is not found. It is made." And in that moment Ethan understood. Redemption had not come through gunfire or defiance, but through the choice to stand, to love, to build where others sought only to destroy. His scars remained, as did hers, but they no longer defined them. Together they were something new, something unshaken by the cruelty of men or the indifference of the land. So if you ever ride through that stretch of desert and see a small ranch where smoke rises from a chimney and laughter drifts into the air, remember this. In a world where freedom was rare as rain, Ethan Cole chose love. And by loving Iona, he found not just a wife, but the man he was meant to be. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.